This is the Metropolitan Council meeting this Wednesday, February 26th. It's great to see everybody. Just for the record, it is a sunny day. No.
Warm.
And the sun is out. I mean, there are times of the year when we're starting this meeting and the sun is setting. Not today.
So, Mr. Chair, does that mean everything goes on consent tonight? Just kidding.
Everything's sunny. So we have a number of business items in the agenda today, but we are having a great presentation that we've been looking forward to about development trends along transit, which is very timely, and we're interested in hearing all about that. With that, unless there's an objection, I will rule the agenda is approved. And we do have minutes that were sent out in advance from our meeting on February 12th. Unless there's corrections or additions, I would entertain a motion on a second to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? All right, those minutes are approved. We now have that moment when we get to hear from Tom again, who is members of the public are invited to address the council on matters that are not on the agenda. And those statements are limited to 3 minutes, but you are invited to come back to a future meeting, which you have done. So Tom Magin, am I pronouncing that right? Magin.
Close enough.
Hard G, Magin. Welcome. Come forward, and you can either sit, stand, and choose whatever microphone you'd like. All right.
It's been, I can't believe it's been 2 weeks.
It's been 2 weeks.
It went so fast, it seemed like 3 minutes.
It's just the other day.
Should be no surprise, I'm here to state my opposition to taking the buses off Nicollet Mall. The last time I was here, I mentioned all the people who rely upon Nicollet, the buses, 11, 10, 17, and 18 that travel along Nicollet. Local people, I was speaking as a resident of Loring Park. My address is 1350 Nicollet Mall. The last time I failed to mention 2 very important groups who ride those buses. One is parents with kids. I don't think I mentioned them. How could I forget all those strollers? And blind people. We have a lot of blind people on those buses. So please add those to your list of needy people who take the buses on Nicollet Mall. This is my list. And this is only since the last meeting. Obviously, with 3 minutes, we're not going to go through it. I calculated if we went through this list and the other list, we could spend 3 hours together. And that would just be my part. Then 17 other people could speak. So I'm just going to say, because of that, I'm going to quickly give my opening statement and then my closing remarks. And I'll be back next week to start hacking away at the list, which I guarantee you will not be any shorter. Watch it. Now, any problems on Nicollet Mall were man-made. The buses didn't cause them. The pedestrians didn't cause them. They were caused by what I call the floundering fathers and mothers of Minneapolis, not to be confused with the founding fathers. We got the floundering mothers and fathers of Minneapolis. A few years ago, $50 million was spent on Nicollet Mall. Much of the work was utilities that needed to be replaced and so on. In addition to that, what did we get for our $50 million? We got a road that's too narrow and sidewalks that are too wide. Hence our problem, created by the mothers and fathers of Minneapolis. Something happened last night which caused me to forget about the list. I attended a meeting at the school, the Wharton School, I think it is, on 26th Street. Wow, we're going quick. And I was amazed at how friendly and gleeful everyone was. It was about the Kmart property. And I realized that they were so happy because they were about to create something new and exciting. And then I thought, well, why did I have a different feeling when I went to the 2 meetings about my Nicollet Mall? Well, it was like going to a wake. People were sitting there waiting for this cadaver to finally go rigor mortis. You know, it was a wake, and it's red. In closing, let me say, if taking the buses off is such a great idea, why are we waiting a year? Could it be because there's an election in between? If it's a good idea a year from now, it's a good idea today, or maybe it's not a good idea at all. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Also, I would, we'll get that information. You obviously know about other outreach meetings about the subject of Nicollet Mall, and we'll make sure you know about those. But also, if you'd like to either lend us or give us that list, we'll make sure it's copied and given to all our council members. If you would want to share it, you can do that now, or
It's not a secret. It's not typed.
well, you could share that and we can spread it around, or we can make copies for next 2 weeks from now.
Well, you mean you want it now? I can do it.
Yeah, either way. Yeah, well, okay. Well, we're sending our best to come and visit with you.
Careful, I have it memorized, so
Oh, okay.
if it gets lost. Sure, if it gets lost,
Thank you.
I got it.
Would you give this to Ryan?
Well, we could make it, yeah, bring it to Ryan. We'll copy it, so
I
you,
misunderstood.
No, that's okay.
all right.
Judy's our secretary.
I was ready to
Thank you,
make a
Judy.
copy or do whatever I needed to
I was
do.
going to ask him what bus he takes.
Yeah, we needed clarity about what that plan was.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, we're on to is there any other members of the public who would like to address the council? Okay, nobody else has registered. All right, so now we're on to the consent business agenda. Is there a motion and a second to approve the consent business items?
Make a motion. Second.
Thank you, thank you. Any discussion, questions? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, those business items are approved. On to the non-consent reports of standing committee. First, the Community Development Committee. Councilmember Lilly.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. So Community Development Committee brings 3 items for consideration this evening. And some of these have come forward, or all of them maybe, without being in committee due to scheduling and a couple of cancellations. So just to note that. The first items, but they were on the consent agenda, or most of them were in committee, correct? The committee that didn't happen?
But they weren't because there wasn't enough.
Right, we didn't, got it.
There was no quorum.
There was no quorum, right. And so the first is business item 2025-47. It's for an award to Washington County to acquire land for the Big Marine Park Reserve. So Big Marine Park Reserve is an 1,800-acre park reserve located in the northern part of Washington County. It features high-quality natural resources and is popular for swimming and fishing. The 80-acre Boren property is an inholding within the approved boundary of the park reserve and contains hardwoods, over 12 acres of wetlands, and ag land that will be restored for natural resources. The property was appraised at $1,715,000, and the seller agreed to that amount. The total project cost is $1,734,243. The county, Washington County, is responsible for a 25% local match. The Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission reviewed this item at their regular meeting earlier this month in February and unanimously approved the proposed action. The February 18th Community Development Committee meeting was canceled, so there was no committee recommendation, but I'm moving this item forward to the honor the agreed upon timeline with our agency partner. So, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council approve a grant of up to $1,300,682 from the Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund to Washington County to acquire an 80-acre parcel located in the southeast quadrant of the 180th Street and Manning Trail in Marine on St. Croix for the Big Marine Park Reserve, and that we authorize the Community Development Committee Director to execute the grant agreement and restrictive covenant on behalf of the council.
Great, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. And I'm just going to repeat what Councilmember Lilligren said. Because there wasn't a quorum in Community Development Committee, this is now actually coming as a committee recommendation.
Correct.
But it was presented, it was a conversation. We want to make sure everybody on the council knows that we are acting out of the need of interest to advance some of this good work without a full vote in the council meeting. But we can do that as a full council because we're the full council. I said that. Any comments? Councilmember Cedarburg.
Thank you so much. I just want to tag on to this Big Marine Reserve, that in October 2024, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources has designated an 1,820-acre wooded area in Washington County that adjoins Big Marine Reserve as a wildlife management area, which will now be known as Keystone Woods. And this wildlife area covers, again, Manning Trail, et cetera. Its area will offer hunting, hiking, fishing, wildlife viewing, among other typical uses. So now, in northern Washington County, which is 30 to 40 minutes away from the Twin Cities, you're going to have 3,500 acres of lakes, streams, preserves, hunting, fishing, and it's really going to be, you know, a gem to the region. So along with the DNR, and this is all in Lake Township. So we'll keep working on our parks and trails and really trying to continue to gather some of this undeveloped land. So we have contiguous greenland and green space for animals and trees and ecosystems. And that's really important, not to have a lot of little things, but when you have contiguous areas like this, it really does enhance the natural resources, water, and sustainability, and animals and things like that.
Great, thank you for that explanation. Councilmember Vento.
I don't want to, I want to thank both the CDC and you, Councilmember Cedarburg, for promoting this. There was no dissent on the part of the MPOSC members. They were very enthused, and there was no dissent from the community on this. It's strongly supported. And since we're enjoying spring now, autumn can't be far away, so I want to make a tourism plug for you folks to go out to this area, because it is incredible, especially in the fall of the year. There is nothing prettier than a drive north of Stillwater on 95 through Marina and St. Croix. There are some darling spots there to stop and eat and shop and have a grand time. And it's just lovely. You can camp, you can do everything out there. So when you're hungry for a taste of New England, but you don't want to pack your suitcase and fly on an airplane, you can just go to this lovely corner of Washington County.
Well, Mr. Chair, I don't know what says vacation. Oh, come tours do better than we're moving right from spring to fall. I just want to add that.
Well, you
I'm a
know,
little depressed right now, but I'm
things
going to come back.
things are moving fast in this world. Any other comments? I would say that it is a beautiful area, and I have ridden my bike and driven along 95, and I even have pictures of the 4th of July parade at Marine St. Croix, if anybody's ever interested, and I could find them in some shoebox, but it's a delightful area. With that, are we ready to vote? I think we are. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that motion carried. Councilmember Lilligren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. The next business item is 2025-48. It is another Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund allocation, this time to Scott County, to acquire land for the Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve. Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve is a 2,400-acre future park reserve located in the southwest corner of Scott County along the Minnesota River Bluffs. The 85-acre Leonard property is an in-holding within the approved boundary of the park reserve and contains 40 acres of forest and 45 acres of altered wetlands and ag land that will be restored for natural resources. The property was appraised at $1,040,000, and the seller agreed to that amount. The project cost is $1,076,033. The county, Scott County, is responsible for a 25% local match. The Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission reviewed this item at the regular meeting earlier this month and unanimously approved the proposed actions. The February 18th Community Development Committee meeting was canceled due to lack of quorum, so there's no committee recommendation, but I'm moving this item forward to honor the agreed upon timeline with our agency partner. So, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council approve a grant of up to $807.25 from the Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund to Scott County to acquire an 85-acre parcel located at 17130 Salisbury Hill Road in Belle Plaine for the Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve, and authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreement and restrictive covenant on behalf of the council.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Councilmember Benton.
Again, this was one where there was full and enthusiastic support from MPOSC.
Lovely. Anyone else? All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carried. Now, leaving parks for a minute and on to the HRA. Councilmember Lilliker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is a little different. This is approving the Metro HRA Administrative Plan revision, the waiting list preference. And this is business item 2025-67, and it's to revise the administrative plan for the Metro HRA to incorporate a new waiting list preference. Some background: the Metropolitan Housing and Redevelopment Authority, or HRA, is required by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, to adopt an administrative plan that establishes policies for administering the Housing Choice Voucher Program. One element of the administrative plan is a description of the method for opening and selecting applicants from the waiting list, including a system of admission preferences. HUD allows housing authorities to establish local preferences and to give priority to serving families that meet certain criteria. Notably, the proposed policy change implements one of the commitments made through the Council's work with the American Indian Advisory Council as part of Imagine 2050 that states the Metro HRA would make this update to the waiting list in 2025. The Metro HRA outreach team held engagement sessions with voucher holders who identify as Native American in January. These conversations inform the proposal in front of us today. Because of the cancellation of the Community Development Committee, this item is being brought forward to the council. This allows any changes to be made ahead of the Metro HRA opening its waiting list for the Housing Choice Voucher Program in April, including communications, application materials, and other preparations to ensure that eligible residents are aware of the opening and applicable preferences. And Mr. Chair, I just want to really thank Ms. Smith, who's here today, and her team for moving on this. With the CDC leading up to this, we had some incredible presentations and information shared, and many of us were here the last time the list opened, right? And so we know what we've learned things and how exciting this time is for us and for the Metro HRA. So, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council approve a revision to the Housing Choice Voucher Administrative Plan to add the following waiting list preference. The Public Housing Agency, PHA, will offer a preference for 10% of waiting list placements to households whose head identifies as American Indian. And that's me motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, thank you. And also, thank you to staff and to committee members, although you didn't have a quorum, advancing it on this day makes sense to me in terms of the timeliness. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carried. Thanks. We have no reports from the Environment Committee, no reports from the Management Committee, And what I think might be a first, no reports from the Transportation Committee. No joint reports. However, there is one other business item relates to appointments to the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission, MPOS, Districts E, F, G, and H. And the names of Chris Sewig, Cecily Harris, Anthony Taylor, Amanda Dewar have been advanced by a nominating committee process. So thank you, Councilmember Bento and Councilmember Pacheco, for doing the deliberations, the interviews, for not, I won't say it's rare, but I know all these folks, they are very engaged representatives. Their enthusiasm and knowledge of our regional park systems is really great. So I'm thrilled to see them and to actually advance those appointments. So with that, is there a motion and a second to confirm my appointments in these positions?
Mr. Chair, I'll move.
A second.
Thank you, thank you. Any discussion? Councilmember Vento.
I want to thank Councilmember Pacheco. He was a great member of the interview team. It was fun to be on an interview team with him, so thank you very much. And I want to second what you said, Mr. Chair, regarding these individuals who are being reappointed. I want to thank Emmett as well. This is a lot of work getting folks to get the paperwork in, getting the schedule set up, and he did just a great job. So it went well, and we have a great MPOS team. It's fully filled, which is huge, and they're doing great work. So, and their meetings almost always run till 6 o'clock, if not later. But they work hard, and they're a great team, and the staff always come well prepared, and the commission is always very well informed and ready to deliberate.
Great, thanks. Councilmember Seaver.
Thank you. So Ms. Harris is representative on the committee for Washington County and other parts close by, and I would encourage council members to reach out to your member of the MPOS committee and form a good relationship with them, because Ms. Harris is keeping me informed of when there's open houses or when there's an event to attend, or, so I can tag along.
Yeah.
And it's been really, really good. So I hear about it before it happens instead of after. And you may not be able to make them all, but it's really good to get out and see all the small things that are happening and large things that are happening in the community. And you get, boots on the ground tours of this as well. So it's really, really fun. So I just encourage everybody to get to know your committee member.
Great advice. Thank you. Any other comments? All right, there was, I think there was a motion and a
Yes.
second, right? Yes, there were. Bento, Pacheco. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Business item is approved. On to our information item. And I'm thrilled to introduce Michael Krantz, Amy Yoder, maybe more, maybe others.
Just us.
Just you, okay. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair, council members. I'm Michael Krantz, Senior Manager of Transit-Oriented Development.
And I'm Amy Yoder, a planner in the Transit-Oriented Development Office, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs. So today I'm going to take you through a introduction to some of the highlights from our 2024 Development Trends Along Transit report. One thing to note with this report is that the data we use, the permit data, does arrive on a slight delay. So the most recent year for this report is 2023. Just keep that in mind. So starting off, the Development Trends Along Transit report explores development near transit lines that qualify as high-frequency transit. So that's service arriving every 15 minutes or less for most of the week. These high-frequency transit lines include LRT, BRT, and high-frequency local bus routes. The report looks at multifamily residential developments, which is any multifamily development with 2 or more units, but mostly we're looking at 5 or more units. It's 99% of the data in this. We also look at commercial developments, including renovations, public and institutional developments, and industrial developments. Developments are assigned to a transitway when permitted after a certain point in the transit planning process. So once a transitway has passed certain council-approved milestones, the route and station areas are likely to have been included in the developer's decision-making process. So we can be pretty certain that they would have known these transit lines were coming. On the right side of this slide, you can see the starting year for the included transitways. In 2023, we added the F line, so that's the newest piece of our analysis. This map shows one of many maps in the report, which the report I think was linked for you in the agenda, showing the permits from 2023. Transitway buffers are shown in kind of a light gray, and the transit lines are shown with upcoming transit lines and dashed lines, and currently operating transit lines as solid lines. Each bubble represents a permit, with the size of the bubble indicating the reported permit value. So bigger permit, bigger bubble. Residential permits are shown in kind of a yellow-orange, commercial in red, public and institutional in blue, and industrial in purple. In 2023, we saw 42% of the region's permit value located near high-frequency transit, with 4,180 multifamily units. Looking just at how we set up this analysis, the buffers for this analysis include areas within a half mile of transit stations or a quarter mile around local bus routes. These transit stations and buffer areas make up just 3.4% of the region's land area. Since 2009, we've seen 38% of regional permit value on that just 3.4% of land area. Continuing with the regional overview, just under 60,000 multifamily permits have been permitted between 2009 and 2023 near high-frequency transit, which is 41% of the units in the region. When we look at development by permit value instead of by units, we see that developments near high-frequency transit represent 44% of multifamily permit value. Commercial permits near high-frequency transit also hit 44%, and we see 31% of public and institutional and 5% of industrial. That represents over $19.2 billion since 2009 out of just under $50 billion for the region. This slide shows a chart that includes high-frequency transitway permit value since 2009. So the dotted line at the top shows the total value for those years near high-frequency transit, and then each development type is shown in a bar underneath. When I'm looking at this chart, the main thing I'm really kind of following is the multifamily residential permit trends. Of note, we saw record amounts of multifamily permits in 2022. We all have been hearing about and talking about some slowing of development in the region, and we can see that in 2023 with the permits. We're also seeing indications that there's a reduction in construction in 2024. But it's important to remember that the region did see record permit values in 2023 and also relatively strong numbers of permits in 2020 and 2021, even in the beginning of the COVID pandemic. This slide shows a map with the last 5 years of permits for multifamily permits in the region. The data up in the left corner is from the whole period. The map is just last 5 years. We're seeing kind of the expected clusters near high-frequency transit and near urban cores, established corridors, even upcoming corridors like the Green Line extension. As I mentioned earlier, since 2009, it's just under 60,000 units, which is $10.4 billion in permit value, representing 44% of the residential permit value in the region. This map is showing some of the commercial permits for the last 5 years. Again, seeing some clustering in the urban areas, but also along established commercial corridors and along high-frequency transit, notably not just near LRT, not just near BRT, it's the whole transit network working together where we're really seeing that development. Since 2009, that includes $6.2 billion in permit value for commercial development, which is 44%, again, of the region's permit value. We also do an analysis of the affordable housing production data that is put together by the Metropolitan Council. This is a separate data set, so we're actually looking at a slightly different time scale. So for the affordable housing production data, it's going from 2014 to 2023. With that analysis, we've seen that 51% of affordable multifamily units are near high-frequency transit, which is 10,710 or so units. Of that 51%, looking at the deeply affordable units, 77% of deeply affordable units in the region are near high-frequency transit. That means that the most need-based housing, those who really, really need these connections, are able to access our transit network and get kind of the most they can out of that network.
Mr. Chair, could I just ask one quick question?
Go ahead.
And that's by design, because when you look at how we score in Minnesota Housing and maybe even local agencies, I mean, I think there's a great alignment around putting them near transit corridors. So this is really the coming together of all of that. So it's exciting, but it shouldn't be a surprise, because I think that there's been planning around that as far as applications coming in for the projects too, to make sure that they've got the funding needed to build it. Would that be fair?
Yes, Chair and Council Member, that would be correct. And something that's actually also interesting to note is we have been prioritizing deeply affordable units near these areas where they have access to a lot of resources and connection. But the council has also been trying to prioritize deeply affordable units throughout the region. So actually, in last year's report, this figure was 83%, and now it's 77%. But that drop isn't because we're producing fewer housing units near transit. It's because we're producing more units outside of those kind of central urban cores. So we are seeing just more units being produced, both in these areas and also throughout the rest of the region.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks. Since we paused, I thought I'd ask a question that occurred to me on slide 5, but it kind of, the same issue kind of reoccurs in each slide. And I just want to make sure that I am completely understanding what we're talking about. So on slide 5, we talked about 2 sort of different station areas and buffers. Here we're talking about near high-frequency transit.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, are those the same thing?
Yes. Okay. So I'm going back to, I think this is slide 5.
This is the one that triggered it, but
yeah.
yeah, it does.
So the difference is that with the large capital projects, we're using a station area buffer, which is kind of the industry standard for these types of analyses. And that's a half mile.
Sure.
Assumably, a half mile, it's relatively easy to get to that station area, right? With the high-frequency local bus routes, because those are a different type of investment, we looked at a quarter-mile buffer. So those buffers, that creates the geographic buffer. And then to make it extra complicated, we also have the temporal requirements. So we're looking at permits that are near a transit line once it's operational, right? And all of those requirements get applied to the affordable housing too. So anytime we talk about near high-frequency transit, we're talking about within those buffers and within those timelines. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. It's very helpful. I mean, things, I know that's kind of splitting hairs, but
No, it's helpful to
yeah, when you're
understand.
talking millions and millions of dollars or whatever.
Yeah, Councilmember Carter. no?
Thanks.
It was the same question.
Good question. Well, great minds think alike.
Thank you, Chair, council members. There's a lot of data in this, and I encourage you to look at the report as well, because I am just skimming the surface, so I apologize for going a little fast on that. Now, where was I? Here we go. Okay, so back to the affordable housing production. This chart is showing affordable housing production near transit by transit line. So a development could actually be on this chart more than once if it were close to two different transit lines, if it was within that buffer that we were just discussing. Key here to me is this is really showing that we are seeing affordable housing production near all of our types of transit, near our LRT, near our BRT, near our high-frequency local bus. We're seeing this housing that's very necessary and very needed throughout the transit network, including in some of our new and up-and-coming planned transit ways, like the E line, like the F line. In just a couple years already, we're seeing significant investment. In summary, the region's growth has concentrated along high-frequency transit, and it's continued to do so. 44% of multifamily permits by permit value in the region since 2009 have been on that just 3.4% of land area, including just under 60,000 multifamily units, which is, again, 38% of the regional total development value. Additionally, the council also has a development tracking process where we look at media coverage of developments. And based off of that development monitoring, we can estimate that 46% of the developments that are being discussed are also planned to be near high-frequency transit. So now that we've thrown all those numbers at you, Michael is going to go through why these trends are really important for what we're all trying to do in our region.
Thank you, Amy. So the development trends that Amy shared are really an economic development story, but they're also more than that. The type of development that we're seeing, where that's occurring, has a significant impact on a variety of regional goals related to climate, health, our natural habitat, and the resilience of our communities. And I'm not going to be able to get into all of that, but I do want to summarize how this development relates to our housing supply and how that impacts housing prices, how transportation contributes to overall affordability for households, how TOD is an important tool for reducing vehicle miles traveled, as well as reducing climate warming emissions, how jobs and housing density contributes directly to transit effectiveness and efficiency, and also how TOD can help reduce pressure on municipal budgets.
Mr. Chair, just one other quick clarification, kind of bouncing. Is this all types of housing, or is this mostly rental housing? Or is it both?
It is looking at the entire, all housing collectively. Okay. But I'll address some of those details through the presentation. And if there are additional questions, please let me know.
Thank you.
Yeah. So new housing, including market rate housing, can lower housing costs in a couple different ways. First, new housing creates what economists call movement chains or migration chains. So when new housing is built, somebody moves into that housing and they create a vacancy somewhere. Somebody moves into that vacancy and they create a vacancy somewhere else. And that new housing effectively ripples throughout the housing market. And when researchers have looked at that new housing, what they find is that the cost of housing in the immediate neighborhood of that new housing goes down relative to neighborhoods that didn't see that new housing constructed. What they also find is that new housing, 100 new units of market rate housing, can contribute to 70 vacancies in lower income neighborhoods, really benefiting households across market segments. Another way that new housing can contribute to affordability happens over a much longer timescale through a process called filtering. So that the luxury housing that's built today can effectively become the affordable housing of tomorrow. And researchers have tracked the cost of that housing over time and find that in a healthy housing market where you see a sufficient supply of new housing being built, that housing can gradually become more affordable. The reverse can also be true. In a heavily supply-constrained market, you can see affordable housing that's built to be affordable and is marketed as affordable housing can increase in cost far faster than inflation and become increasingly inaccessible. And so I think that's a process called reverse filtering. And when we see a loss of NOAA housing, that's really a signal of a supply-constrained market and evidence that there is a need for additional housing.
And by NOAA, you mean naturally occurring affordable housing?
Yes.
Just showing off.
Yes. Now, sorry, I want to place this in the context of historical housing production in the region. So our permit data that Amy was sharing, begins in 2009, which, as you all know, is in the midst of a significant recession. Between 2005 and 2009, housing production plummeted significantly, both in our region but also across the country. And since it was really only in 2019 that we saw housing production really return to pre-recession levels of housing production. And since 2022, we've again seen that housing production drop below pre-recession levels of housing production. One thing I want to point out is that new housing construction that allowed us to return to those pre-recession levels is partly due to the fact that we saw a significant increase in multifamily construction. And that really single-family construction has been well below those pre-recession levels, less than half of what we were seeing before the recession. So when we layer this in with the growth of the region, we've continued to see the region steadily grow. And it's really this combination of that significant decline in housing production and that continued growth in the region's population that helps explain the significant deficit in housing that many are talking about today. On the flip side, I do want to emphasize that the nearly 60,000 units in housing construction that Amy mentioned that has been built near transit really has helped mitigate some of the increase in housing costs. And that in many ways, we're in a better situation than a lot of peer regions that have seen their housing costs grow rapidly. At the same time, I think that there's a general consensus that we continue to need significantly more housing.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Because I know you're going to go into sort of location and then into greenhouse gases, but just on this slide, and, you know, many of it, you referenced this, Michael, and many of us have been sort of hearing or seeing this conversation about, well, about the lack of affordable housing, lack of housing production, a lot of it out in Minneapolis. And to me, it is, well, I'm not the experts you are. So I'm just wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on how what you're presenting this to us here. It seems much deeper, richer, more nuanced, maybe more about the relationships within the statistics. And it seems to be painting a somewhat different picture than what we're seeing in some of the media posts and things like that. So I feel like I'm missing something here because I can't really reconcile what I'm seeing from this one source and what I'm seeing from you.
Chair, council members, if I might clarify, what sources or information, what's the
Post is one
difference?
of them. There's been quite a bit of opinion pieces, or not quite a bit, at least two, about the drastic reduction in affordable housing production and what the impact on the housing stock. Has anyone else seen these? Or?
I'm hearing it too.
Okay, all right.
So that's why I have more questions too, because
Director Barajas is.
it's reality versus, you know.
Welcome, Lisa.
Mr. Chair, council members, I think I've read those articles as well. Lisa Barajas, Executive Director of Community Development, for the record. What we have found in our analysis and reviewing those is that they're often looking at very short timeframes.
Sure.
Look back period of 2 or 3 years. So they're using that big spike in 2020, 2021 as things are crashing. But when you look back at the full length of how has our region been growing over the last 20 years, you see that we have these, big spikes and then the market drops off and we've been recovering and very strong. It's like Michael had stated, hitting some of our peak production years just in the last couple of years.
Sure.
So if you only look back in that window, then it looks like the sky is falling.
Thanks.
When you look back over a longer time story, as you're seeing on this slide, then you see we're actually kind of modulating to where our standard is or what a rolling average would look like.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, if I may, Director Barajas, a response to someone who might challenge me about this is, if you look back at a longer time frame, you'll see more accurate data.
You get a bigger picture of what's
Bigger
actually
picture.
happening.
But part of this bigger picture is that we have a lot of production that we have not caught up from 2008, 2009.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
Mr. Chair, if I could just prompt maybe one more piece to Lisa or team. There's also there's a national story that can get clouded in the conversation with a local or regional story. And the national story in many cases is more dire than what we have seen in this region, in part because this region has outproduced relative to other regions the number of housing units during this time period. And so while I think it's important to probably say, and this is my word, so I want you to add to it if you want, like, this doesn't mean we don't have things we have to work on, and it does not mean we have capacity to a degree where affordability isn't an issue, and particularly as you look at the 30% AMI and below levels. However, relative to some of our regional peers around the country, we wouldn't trade places as we are wading into this difficult topic. Is that a fair way to frame it, or how would you change what I just said to make it sound better?
No, absolutely, exactly what you said. And as Michael had noted earlier, we see a lot of production in especially the more expensive housing, less production on that deeply affordable level. This is not news to folks on Community Development Committee either, where we talk a lot about that lack of production in that 30% AMI level and below. We're not seeing that trickle down. It never trickles down to that level in a dignified fashion. And so certainly the big picture is a good news story, but when you dig in deeper on all those different elements, then then you see different things when you slice and dice.
Yeah, Diego.
To like Chair Lilligren's point, the main thing you're seeing in the media that's coming out is permits. The number of permits. We're looking at a bigger level at the amount of housing that we are producing, but when you actually look at the number of permits that are getting pulled, it is lining up to what it was back in 2009, with the number of permits that are getting pulled in St. Paul, number of permits that are getting pulled, but each individual permit reflects 200, 300, 400 multifamily units individually. But if you look at 2009, there wasn't a lot of multifamily permits that were getting pulled back then compared to 2022, where the number of multifamily permits drastically increased compared to 2009.
True.
And that's why they're using that clickbait. It's permits, not actual housing that they're reflecting in their numbers.
Thanks, very helpful. Thanks.
Mr. Chair. Just briefly, two things. Councilmember Morales, you're going to be great on CDC. Yep, because I won't be on there anymore, but I'm going to tune in. And then the other thing, and I'm going to just keep saying this, there's still the extraction of housing that used to be available that is now being bought by equity and investment firms. And that's being discussed in Congress now. I don't know if anybody will do anything about it, but that is showing up around the country. And those firms are also now buying up electrical companies and plumbing companies and, those types of operations because they're great investments. And so it's a big conversation. So we're looking at the elephant and only seeing parts of it at a time. I think when we have these conversations, especially with advocates and at the legislature and all the people, but I just want to remind people that that is a phenomenon that is pretty new here within the last 15 or 20 years. And so as homes continue to be extracted out of the for-purchase market and put into rental pools, which is, they're still rental, but it just goes against that construction, new construction and existing NOAA, because we've lost that. And I think that at some point, somebody, it might not be us, but maybe we can be part of the messaging that there should be a look at that. And maybe it goes against the Constitution, property rights and all of that good stuff. But these phenomenons are impacting that I think rarely get brought up in the conversation too. And so everybody swings around and looks at government like you do your part. Well, we are doing everything we can, but we've got the private sector that in some cases is not helping at all. And I just want to keep saying that because I don't know how it's tracked. Some people have numbers on this, but someday I'd love to have a heat map of that in our region and maybe we can get there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. So just a couple points I just want to reiterate that I think in many ways we are, as Ryan mentioned, much better off than a lot of peer regions, but there is still a significant need, and that need is absolutely greatest at that 30% level and below, which is why there's significant investment needed at those levels. And I think the Fed has done some of the research that you're talking about, looking at where LLCs have been acquiring housing that was otherwise ownership. We've taken a look at that at a high level, and we could potentially pull together those maps and bring that back for a future presentation, because I think that is an important point. I think to some extent, those trends in acquiring, some have looked at this, and those trends in acquiring what would otherwise be owned properties is facilitated to an extent by a shortage in overall housing supply. So, and with that, I'll just go ahead and move on to the next point. So in addition to housing supply, where housing is located in the region can also have an impact on overall affordability. So these maps are actually based on some research that was sponsored by HUD and released last year. So the map on the left here is showing how much very low-income individuals spend on housing as a percent of income for every census tract in the region. And I think this map fits a pretty familiar narrative that housing is generally more expensive closer to the center of the region. I think what we often miss with this narrative is the extent to which transportation costs can have an impact on overall household budgets. So to support that conversation, HUD developed an analysis to look at the combination of both housing and transportation costs. And so here on the right, this chart is looking at the percent of income, again, that those very low income households are spending on both housing and transportation. So when we factor in transportation costs, we find that walkable neighborhoods served by transit near job centers are on average the most affordable places for those households to live in the region. And this largely comes down to the cost of owning, operating, and maintaining a car.
It's quite extraordinary when you think those two maps, that a more expensive home is a cheaper place to live.
Yeah. I think the data is pretty dramatic. When you look just at the transportation costs, how dramatically different it is living in a neighborhood where you don't need to own a car versus one where that's the only way to get to your destinations.
And Mr. Chair, just to also, and we all start somewhere, right? But when I didn't have kids, I was in the lighter blue area. And as I kept giving birth and not being able to, strap them on my back or stick them on a bus, I mean, you finally have to find another house. So there's that kind of, and then I am now an empty nester, right? And I'm trying to figure out, what transportation would look like for me now that I don't have to strap people to my back. So I'd love to see the life cycle of people too, and how they move, and then the ones that get stuck because the market won't let them out of their 5-bedroom, 4-bath house into something that's more affordable. You know what I mean? That piece of it is just fascinating to me too.
Right. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think that goes to some of the conversation, even that Councilmember Lilligren, and like the perceptions of what you read in the newspaper of when you're looking for a house and you need X for a down payment, and that down payment is 3 times more, even if it might be a neighborhood that you have the benefits of transportation or transit access, it makes big decisions for you. And, even the stories that you read in the paper of rents being high, house prices being high, they are. And I think that, the TOD part of this is great. I mean, this is all perfectly exciting news, I think, and it really tells us the big part of the story. But it all gets conflated with all of the cost pieces. I live in an area that's considered naturally occurring affordable housing. And it's probably tripled in value in the time we've lived there. So I don't know that, 20-year younger Deb would say, oh yeah, I can afford that, and so that's part of the dynamic, is the feelings that tied to the actual costs and seeing those numbers that really are guiding some of the broader narrative.
Right, thank you.
All right. Chair, I think one other point that I'll make before I move on this map, so this is just looking at a very low-income individual, but HUD did this analysis for a variety of different household profiles, so you can look at how it varies depending on family size and overall income. So that's actually a piece that we're hoping to map and get on the TOD website so we can share that, because it does look different depending on what those different household needs are. So shifting gears, I do want to talk about how TOD is also a tool to help address climate change. So this chart is based on research from the Cool Climate Network, where they were looking at the extent to which different policies can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And what they find is that urban infill is the single most effective policy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And if you really read their research, when they're talking about urban infill, what they're really talking about is that medium to high density mixed use development in walkable neighborhoods served by transit. So this is a map which relates to the prior slide. It's actually based on an analysis by EcoData Lab, and they base their analysis on research also from the Cool Climate Network, which did the prior chart. And this helps explain why urban infill is such an important strategy. So what this map is showing is average household emissions based on consumption. So this doesn't show where emissions are generated in the region. So as an example, when I take a flight, my emissions are assigned to my census tract and not to the airport, just to help illustrate that. So census tracts shown in orange are generating above the national average in household emissions, and census tracts shown in green are generating below the national average in household emissions. And like the housing and transportation affordability maps that I was showing previously, what this shows is that those walkable communities, those transit-oriented communities, generate well below the national average in household emissions, which is why infill development is such an important strategy for achieving our goals for reducing regional emissions. And so going back to the data that Amy was sharing, the fact that we've seen 44% of our multifamily development and commercial development in our transit areas is a really important part to helping us achieve some of those broader goals.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go for it.
No, I was just going to read the way to read this map. I mean, despite air travel here for a minute, we have a walkable airport. The residents in those zip codes are just driving more. Is that kind of how we read that? Okay.
Yeah, there are two big factors that really contribute. One is wealth can contribute it. I mean, households that consume more generate more emissions. The largest piece is really transportation-related emissions. So when you dive into the data, VMT is the biggest contributor. Yeah, and I think one of the points that they make is that this really isn't meant to be an indictment of anybody's individual choices. I mean, the outcome of a lot of policy.
It's just, that's what the data shows.
Yeah, that's just what the data shows.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And kind of building on that, and this actually goes back to the last slide for the greenhouse gas reduction potential.
Yeah.
And so and I'm going to show my ignorance here, I apologize. How does healthy diets fit into this graph? How does that reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Chair and council member, so I'll be honest, I'm not an expert on all of these policies, but my understanding is that really comes down to consumption of meat, and eating less meat contributes to lower emissions.
Yeah. Okay.
How they make it as gross.
I'll buy that.
Livestock are incredibly carbon intensive.
Yes.
Almonds, stay away from almonds. Johnson.
And I think it's interesting because I'm looking at my region and I'm looking at Plymouth because I'm most familiar with that. And it's interesting because you'll see some of those light, like low greenhouse gas, but those are industrial parks too. So, so you're probably, are you tracking business greenhouse gas emissions, or is this household only, or how's that? Because that just is very interesting to me, right?
Yeah, so this is strictly tracking household emissions.
Okay.
So the businesses that exist there, those don't show up on this map. It's really, if those businesses are producing products, the people who consume those products, those emissions would get assigned to their census tract.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And then just one last question. So again, all around the region and looking at my district, so I know there's a lot of agriculture still out in my neck of the woods. So again, how does that factor in then if there aren't a lot of houses out there, but it's more of the darker orange? Just to explain that one to me, I like to explain this to the people that I represent every now and then. So what does that mean?
Essentially that the households that live there need to drive a lot to meet their needs. And that's, again, this is really just looking at not the business side of it, but just household behavior.
So even though it might not be a dense area, the whole census area gets a color? Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
The development trends also have a significant impact on the overall effectiveness and efficiency of our transit system. So this slide is based on a presentation that I actually saw last fall by a land use economist with US DOT. And this won't be surprising, but how people and jobs are distributed within the region has a significant impact on overall transit riders per person. So this basically means is we don't need density everywhere, but it is important for transit to work, but we do need density near transit for it to work effectively and efficiently. So to illustrate that point, you may be familiar with the fact that LA is on average denser than New York, but New York has a lot more of that density located near its transit system, so it has much higher transit ridership on a per person basis. So the fact, again, going back to the development trends, the fact that we have such a high percentage of our housing and commercial being built near transit is really important to the long-term effectiveness and efficiency of our transit system. So finally, I think the last point that we'll make is that transit-oriented communities are a really powerful tool to help build our tax base. As we all know, land in our communities is finite, and TOD makes very efficient and effective use of that land. So to illustrate this point, we've mapped property tax revenue per acre for the entire region from 2006 to 2023. This map is just showing that property tax revenue for the Metro Green Line in 2006, which is when that project entered project development. Parcels shown in dark green are generating up to $15,000 per acre in property tax revenue. And parcels in dark purple are generating over $1 million in property tax revenue per acre on an annual basis. And I think what's really evident from this map is you can very quickly see where our two downtowns are, and that those downtowns in 2006 were connected by what was at the time a relatively low-density commercial corridor. This is that same map again in 2023, and the $9 billion in investment that we've seen along this corridor is immediately evident, both in the downtowns, but also along the corridor, where we've seen a really significant amount of mixed use and multifamily development. So our analysis doesn't capture this, but Urban 3, which is an economics consulting firm, has done what they call a cost of service analysis, where they're looking at both the revenue generated by development as well as the infrastructure and services, the cost of those required to serve that development. And what they find routinely in the communities where they've done this analysis is that transit-oriented communities generate far more in revenue than they tend to consume in services and infrastructure, which really lightens the tax burden on everyone in that community. An incident, as I mentioned before, we've done this for the entire region, so if there's an interest in looking in this for different transitways or different communities, we're happy to do that. We're also building a web application because a lot of our partners have expressed interest in digging into this data. So with that, we've already answered many questions, but we're happy to answer any more.
That's a very powerful presentation. Thank you, Michael and Amy. Questions, discussion? Councilmember Barber.
Just a quick comment. I'm so glad you're making that data available, because there are a lot of communities that are looking for ways to talk about it and talk about the power of transit, talk about the power of transit-oriented development, and especially as we're kind of moving into the next round of comprehensive plans and all of that, more tools that we can give people. And I love the visual display, because when, if you're talking to county commissioners and things, and impact on tax base is definitely something that catches their attention. And so that's a great way for us to kind of relay some of those messages. So I'm really glad you're making that available.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. Yes, I will be pulling out those nice, colorful illustrations and taking them to my presentations in the different communities, because that is very striking and very persuasive in terms of TOD benefits. I really liked in the presentation the fact that in order for this TOD to work, we have to have the whole transit network working together, the light rail, the BRT, the local buses, the developers, getting the right housing types in order for this success to happen. And I'm very interested in the future presentation that also looks at single-family homes in these areas and how they're impacted by being near those corridors. And probably some other things. Also, finding out more about what are the stresses and concerns of developers, and what is the compelling reason for them to choose to develop near the corridors, and how is that impacting other development in other areas where development is needed. That's kind of a lot, but maybe I need to meet with someone. Thank you.
Chair, council member, we're happy to pull together more of that information for you as you need it. I think that there are obviously a lot of pieces there. And I think one thing that Amy has noted previously in these presentations is that we're not saying necessarily that the transit ways are driving that. I think it's an important contribution to the overall development along these. And I think anecdotally, when we talk to developers, it's certainly a big part of how they select sites. It can impact the kind of development that they're going to build, how much parking they need to provide in that development. But it can also similarly maybe there may be implications related to the cost of land for that development when they're locating. So.
Yeah, well, we had a presentation in our Community Development Committee recently, and we had some questions, and the developer said that it was much easier to put the financing package together for like a TOD type project. So all of those factors are important. And
absolutely.
It gets pretty complex, I know.
Yes.
Chair,
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Councilmember Morales.
Thank
No,
you.
I'm putting Councilmember Johnson on probation.
Yeah, sorry.
Councilmember Morales.
I'm number one, it's okay.
To like Councilmember Chambliss' point in regards to what's attracting developers to TOD sites, specifically it's grants, funds
Yes.
coming from the cities, the counties, us, and the feds that make those projects a lot more feasible for it to happen. Right? At the end of the day, it comes down to the money. It's going to cost them the exact same to build that building somewhere else and get zero money from the city, the state, the county, the feds. And it makes it a lot more feasible for them to get a couple $1 million to do it in a transit-oriented development, because there is more money that is available for that. And we're more likely to give money through our livable community grants if it is a TOD development. So that's why there's a lot more development on TOD, because it's just the money at the end of the day.
But don't you think the marketplace provides some advantage, because people want to have the accessibility of transit to make their life more affordable?
It's one of the very minimal underlying factors to it, because at the end of the day, if the bank won't lend you the money, it doesn't matter if you're going to have more people readily available to come and live in that area. Because if you go 20 minutes north of a transit-oriented development area, specifically like University Avenue, you go 20 minutes north, the land's going to be a lot cheaper, but it's still going to cost you the exact same to build it there than it would off of University Avenue. But if you're getting $5, $6, $10 million from the city, the county, Met Council, and the Fed, it makes it so much easier for them to do those projects than to do it 20 minutes away from the transit-oriented developments.
Yeah.
And my other question was, how soon would you get the 2024 permit numbers for all of those? Because 2024 is completely different than 2023 and back. And the only reason I say that is because I track construction projects on a daily basis. So I've seen the number of multifamily projects in 2024 was way less than half of what it was in 2023. Even private and transit-oriented development projects was way less than half of what's
Absolutely.
currently going on.
Chair, council member, we should get that data sometime this summer, and then it usually takes a little bit. We're trying to reduce the delay between when we get that data and when we get this report out. So we'll get that as fast as we can to you folks. One other thing I was hoping to ask, Councilmember Chambliss, you were asking about single-family homes. Is your interest there primarily in ownership opportunities or the single-family home itself? Does that make sense?
Well, whatever the issues are related to single-family homes, obviously we have a shortage of affordable single-family homes and a need and a demand for certain segments of the population.
Right.
So I think that's important. Also, I was thinking about, we haven't seen much in like condominiums where people can buy. If we have people having trouble buying a larger single-family home, or as other Councilmember Johnson said, people who are trying to downsize, but we're having difficulty, downsizing from a 5-bedroom into a 2-bedroom.
Absolutely.
Those are factors that I think can be very valuable to get that information.
Thank you. We have been trying to look into ownership opportunities, and we'll try and put something together on that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Vento?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it'd be a great idea at a committee of the whole if, I'm going to say we, but you all, because it probably won't happen in the next couple of months, but if there would be an opportunity to bring in some developers from various corners of the region to talk about the challenges of development.
Yeah.
And I'd also like us, again, the royal us, you all, to think about bringing in representatives from the business community. I find myself, regardless of where I go, whether it's in the urban area or the suburban area or the rural area, driving by empty businesses down the street from brand-new businesses. And I would like to suggest that I think we need to take a look at vacancy rates as it relates to both commercial and residential, and figure out how we take advantage of what's available. I think it's something for us to consider, because if we build it, they will come. Sure they will, but what are they leaving behind? And what is the loss to the community, both in a sense of community, but also tax base and just making it feel like a thriving community. When I drive by areas where there's a lot of vacancies, it just kind of makes my heart sink. It's pretty depressing. And we've had a number of business owners come to us on a fairly regular basis to talk to us about challenges they're facing. And I would really ask that we put out an extra effort for particularly the small businesses. They're struggling now, and it's getting harder and harder, and I think we need to try and help be a part of the solution for them rather than adding to the challenges. Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate your patience with me. Okay, so two things. So these are permits. They're not certificates of occupancy. So, well, I guess it was a while ago, but at least I know within 20 years, a lot of permits were let, and then the homes didn't get built because the economies shifted, and then things, maybe the original permits weren't even perfected and new stuff had to come. So that's a thing. Mm-hmm. But then also, are you guys capturing how much of those new permits, and especially for the affordable housing, are TIF districts? And tax increment financing is a great tool for affordable housing. And the local government will still get their share, or property taxes will still go to the local units of government, but that increment that would be captured is going into the project. And then when that TIF district is perfected or finalized, then that money will come back on the tax rolls. And sometimes you can roll a TIF district, if it is done earlier or whatever, into something else. But that's the tricky part that I think a lot of local officials don't understand what that tool is about, because you don't get that increase in property tax right away. It might be a 20, 25-year district. I don't know how long they're going out now, but do capture that data too and find out when that full, if TIF was used, when that full amount comes back on the tax rolls. Because that's the moment of wow, for the community.
Yeah, Chair and council members, so the permit data that we capture is reported by the cities to the council, and then that gets aggregated for this report. It doesn't include information related to any TIF districts that are created to help finance those projects. So that really isn't reflected in the analysis. And I know it's a very common tool, as you noted, to help fund affordable housing and to help fill the gap for a lot of those projects. But we haven't done anything to kind of track when and how that's used to help finance affordable housing. But it's a great point. Yeah.
And then, Chair, Councilmember, on the building permit data, we have done some data checking. So at the scale that we're operating at the regional scale and looking primarily at multifamily housing, most of the permits are happening. So that distance between what's actually built and what's permitted, we're not like 100% sure, but we have done checking on that. The big thing that might change is the permit value might not fully represent the ultimate development value, or the number of units might be slightly different. But we're talking about thousands and millions and billions. So it averages out for the most part.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate just the thing on TIF. And I think the important thing on that too is the legislature likes to mess in the ability, sorry, that's probably not the word, but they mess in the ability of locals to maybe use it. It was a big deal to get it to be able to use for affordable housing at one point, but it can really demonstrate what a great tool it is. And I think that too is something that, I don't know, I can't remember from all the stuff we've seen as how we score, but TIF I think is probably a pretty standard tool that councils use if they're in the know of how to use it, and they don't think it's a subsidy to the developer, because it is not.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Chair, council member, if I might follow up on that, I think the maps that we were sharing on tax base, I think really illustrate how much revenue those new developments can generate. And in some cases, not all of that revenue is captured by a TIF district. And even if it is, over time, that becomes a significant source of revenue for those communities. So I think this is a helpful way of thinking about TIF. Even when those TIF districts are created, they can be a real benefit to those communities.
Thank you.
Councilmember Zilliker.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I hesitated raising my hand earlier because I didn't want to be put on probation.
Yeah, you don't want to go there.
It's okay.
I guess we're out
You can
of the
probably
doghouse. But, so thanks. So my question is about the great graphic you just had up. That with the tax per acre comparison between 2006 and 2023. And it's really striking, right? I mean, that really has impact. And Michael, I thought you said something, and maybe I just kind of missed this. And there was someone was doing some kind of analysis on the impacts of other public investments, private sector investments on this kind of data. Did you say something like that?
Chair, Councilmember, yeah, I was referring to an economic analysis that a firm called Urban 3 has done called a cost of service analysis, where they're looking at the combination of the revenue that's being generated by development throughout a region relative to the cost of providing infrastructure and services to that development. And what they essentially do is allocate the cost of building and maintaining roads, providing services to all of the parcels based on their estimated use of that infrastructure.
Cool.
Against the property tax revenue.
Yeah, they're looking at the revenue relative to the cost of those services.
Thanks,
yes.
that's what I thought I heard,
Yeah.
so thanks for clarifying that. And then so is this Urban 3 or this work of the cost of service analysis, is that being manipulated in a way or structured in a way that's kind of easy to understand? You know, this is really easy to understand, right? And so, that's my question. I mean, that would be something really valuable, I think, as public sector to be able to demonstrate to taxpayers that this is what your investment is getting.
So, Chair and Councilmember, what they do, they map it very similar to this, where they look at that net revenue versus net contributor for every parcel across the region. So if development is generating more revenue, you would see essentially a vertical column, and if it's essentially requiring more services and infrastructure than it's generating in revenue, then it would show up as red. So they map it very similar to this. I think it's a very digestible format.
Sure.
It is a far more complicated analysis
Right.
than what we're doing here. This is very simple, which is why we can do it internally. It's much more complicated to go through and say, look at all the roads, look at all the sewers,
Right.
look at all the services that are being provided throughout the region, and then allocate that, which is why it's not done as extensively as this kind of analysis.
Thanks, I appreciate
In
it.
our little sidebar conversation, and not to oversimplify it, but charts like that show the tremendous cost of single-family homes relative to revenue.
Yeah.
Can I have one more thing to
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair and Councilmember, so we did an analysis like this back in 2014, I think it was, in Ramsey County, and I'm looking at Commissioner Carter because she's on the board, and we did it by land unit. And it was an interesting thing to see for the reasons of how different land uses and how they contribute to your overall tax base vis-a-vis their value as well. And so this is a way to graphically display in a way that I wished I could have done, but I didn't have that ability. The other thing you have to layer on top that is really important to do is state tax policy then greatly matters, because the way we treat different parcels and the way we then, have exclusions for certain things and all this. So you have to you don't start at everyone pays in $1 for $1 of value. Right. Commercial pays in a much higher dollar than a residence pays in for $1. And then you have to layer in the idea that they also draw differently on the side of what gets provided by government. And it is a really helpful tool. Really it can be, it's illuminating for policymakers and can also be fraught in community settings where people then, because it upends our minds of who benefits and who doesn't. And so you have to be thoughtful in the way it gets discussed. That's a lesson learned from before.
I appreciate that. And Mr. Chair, if I mean, so does that type of and I get it. I mean, that was my question. This is much more complicated than this relatively simple graphic represents, but this is really effective and I think it's accessible to people, but always kind of looking for that easier way. Councilmember Johnson and I probably agree a lot on the use of TIF, but it's kind of a hard tool to discuss with the communities, right? It takes kind of a deep understanding. And so I'm just wondering, Michael, if has this tight level of analysis, again, recognizing all the complexities that underpin it, has this been done for the whole region? I mean, yeah.
Chair and council member, we have done this for the entire region.
Oh, great.
So we can break over this period when it's available. I mean, there are a couple years where it's not available for some counties, but for the most part, we covered 2006
All right.
from 2023 for the entire region.
Thanks, very helpful.
All right.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would be really interested in seeing the region-wide information. And
Agree.
part of that, it's great that we have all this investment along transit lines, but there's a big part of the region that doesn't have any transit and doesn't get the grants and all of the things, but yet they're still developing without us subsidizing or incenting that in any way. And I don't want to lose sight of all of that other development. It matters to our strength of the region and the vitality of the region, even though we're not doing anything really to help that. And we need to recognize that there are people who are investing in spite of us not putting any money into their particular use. The other thing that I've been turning around in my head was the earlier discussion about the below 30% housing. And with all of these new vouchers that are coming on with the sales tax, I think we need to start looking at the very low income housing a little differently, because if you need services and you're below 30, then it's really great to build specific housing for that. But if it's not tied to services, if you're not having, an extra service need along with your being very low income, it really hamstrings people. And looking at 50 or even 60% level housing is a better way to go, because all those vouchers then can house the people below 30 in something that doesn't have to be subsidized so heavily as the ones that are below 30. Plus, if you no longer need the services or you are not any longer really low income, you don't have to move. Mm-hmm. If you're in a below 30 and you suddenly are now at 50% or 45% or whatever of median income, you're either taking up a really heavily subsidized unit or you need to move. And so the below 50 is actually, I think, a better standard to be working towards, because it gives you more flexibility with the vouchers to house people all the way up to 50% of median income. Just a thought.
Okay. Yeah. Councilmember Johnson.
I'll be brief. Thank you, Ryan, for bringing up the commercial industrial, because it shoulders the local property tax burden in a huge way. So that's why that matters too in a community, and that's why we have fiscal disparities, because after 1972 or whatever it was, communities that were growing greatly in commercial industrial and communities that were recognizing that disparity when it came to property taxes and wealth. So that's why that's there. And boy, we've had to talk to suburban communities about, why are you a giver and not a taker? And it's a whole thing. But I would also say that when communities put their budgets together, they are trying to do pay-go. We don't get in local government, we don't here get to run deficits like the federal government does, right? So we know that we've got to cover our obligations when we set those tax levies. So it's not really a surprise that they're not putting a burden on taxes. I mean, overall, the local unit has to pay for themselves by and large, unless some grants come in, but those are not consistent, as we all know. So I'm not disputing what you're saying, but I also just want people to know they overall in your community, if your projects or your properties are putting a greater burden on what you're doing, something's wrong. You're doing it wrong. So, and then what Councilmember Wolf said.
Okay, any other thoughts, questions? All right, Michael, Amy, will you come back soon?
This was really great.
This is really, really interesting.
One of those pretty graphics.
I loved it.
And your advice is to take a look at the full report, which we will do. Yeah.
And if I might, just since there were a lot of comments on the graphics, I want to quickly credit Clayton Watercott in our office, who really did a lot of these maps. I mean, we get to take credit for them, but he's done a great job pulling those together. So,
and he's also working on 2 of these dashboards, web applications. So you will be able to see both the tax and the development permit data soonish from Clayton.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And Just a couple of quick comments. This has been a busy week in Minnesota, and certainly for Met Council. I want to thank those who have been engaged in multiple conversations. One, of course, we disclosed and agreed with a hearing bill that we should transition away from commuter rail to buses with North Star Rail. I want to say that wasn't taken lightly and not a glib decision. We've actually been processing it really since, more seriously since early December. But having said that, it actually is kind of nice at this year to be able to say, we are going to be good stewards of this transportation system. And if we are able to find a savings by actually curtailing an overly expensive service, which includes not just commuter rail, but some of our large express routes, some other areas in network now that we're actually not expanding. We're actually curtailing some routes, but we're expanding a lot of routes. We're opening 3 transitways. We're actually having a 30% increase in actual mileage within the regular bus system. I mean, that's pretty extraordinary. So I think there's a nice message, and it's resonated, I think, on both sides of the hearings I've talked to, that this is not money to be sent home. This is money to be invested in transit. And we are doubling down and actually building, and will have, especially this year, an interconnected network, which is making a difference, and we saw part of that this afternoon. So stay tuned, and if you ever have any questions about any of that activity, feel free to call Ryan, or actually feel free to call me, and we're happy to talk it through, because I think there's a lot when you are in the middle of a legislature that happens quickly. Having said that, are there any other reports that anybody would like to share? Mr. Regional Administrator.
I don't think I have any report today, Mr. Chair.
And then always the final word we give to our General Counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. It's like 50 degrees out, I'll pass.
All right. Well, we got 30 minutes to the day, and the sun hasn't set, or probably has just about now. Thank you so much. This meeting is adjourned.